Okay. And I have a little bit of business before we start the meeting. Josh, I just forwarded you an email that needs to be looked at right away. If you could take a look at it.
Yes, I just barely saw that. I'll forward that off.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Yep.
Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the first finance meeting of the new school board year. And seeing that we haven't selected a chair for the meeting, I'm going to call the meeting to order, and I would accept a motion for nominations for the position of chair. And that would be from Sarah, Renee, Chris, or Gina, who are on the call.
I'd like to nominate Sarah Regent to be the chair.
So nominated by Gina. And is there a second to that nomination?
I'll second it.
And who was that who seconded?
Renee?
Okay. Are there any other nominations? Okay, could the, oh, did I hear one? No. Could the committee members signify their agreement with a thumbs up for this? Okay, seeing thumbs up from the committee members, I congratulate Sarah on being the chair and turn the meeting over to Sarah.
Thank you. Looks like next on the agenda, we need to elect a vice chair in the event that I am not here. So I would open the floor for nominations for a vice. Which should come from Gina, Renee, or Chris.
I nominate Renee to be the vice chair.
Is there a second? Can
Sure.
I second? Okay, thank you. Any other nominations? Okay, so signify by a thumbs up in favor of Renee for vice chair. 1, 2, 3. I'm also a yes. Congratulations, Renee. Okay, moving right along. Number 3, additions or changes to the agenda. And I think we had an email come out from Tina. So we do need to designate a person, an alternative person to sign warrants. So we'll add that to the agenda for.
That'll be 6.3.
6, well, thank you. And tax stabilization fund 2 years of information. I guess we'll make that 6.4.
Sarah, that information is in the handout that you received today, or the email that Tina sent out today.
Okay. Does that actually need to be added to the agenda?
No, it was part of the goals and priorities that we received from the board Thursday night. And so in the handout that you've received, or the email, it speaks to all of those goals and priorities.
Okay.
So you should have them answered after we go through this.
Okay. So it looks like we just are adding 6.3. Is there anything else? Okay. Hearing nothing else. Number 4 on the agenda is public comment. It looks like we've got a number of people in the meeting. I'm not sure if there's any. Would it? Go ahead, Paul.
It says public comment for anything that's not on the agenda?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you.
All right, I'm not seeing any other. Oh, hang on. Okay. No other. Erica, did you get the addendum? That was, sorry, a chat comment. I just want to make sure she's got that.
We did. Thank you so much. Lisa sent it out.
Okay. All right. No public comment. Then let's move on to item number 5, which is review and approval of the meeting minutes. So it's 5.1 in the committee packet. I trust everybody's had time to review it. Would look for a motion to approve the minutes.
So in committees, we don't have motions. We
Oh,
have
okay.
to approve under just by consensus.
Okay. In that case, any comments or corrections? Seeing none, if everyone is okay with approving the minutes, could you please give me a thumbs up? Chris, Renee, Gina, I'm good with it. Meeting minutes from February 16th are approved. All right, the fun stuff. New business, 6.1. FY22 budget revisions. So we've got a number of handouts here showing the progression from drafts 1, 2, 3. And the addendum, which, sorry, I'm trying to switch between all my screens here. That was sent out today by Tina, and I think Lisa got it to the rest of you on the proposed adjustments for draft 4. Lisa, do you want to go over that?
Sure. So the administration have come up with some reductions in the budget. I think I'm feeling really good about it. The end result is a overall 3.41% increase on the per pupil spending, which is what the voters will see on the ballot. So the email that you received today walks you through where we've come over the budget cycle, and also reviews the board's goals and priorities. So if we start with the very first one, it speaks about sharing the salary and wage increases for certain positions. So I tried to highlight total salary and total benefits, and you can see the overall general fund. This doesn't include the CDCC or grants, but this is the total overall salary, wages, and benefits for your general fund. And you can see the increase from one year to the next, as well as the overall impact on the total budget.
Lisa,
Lisa,
can I just, sorry, Can I just ask, so we're looking at total salary, total benefits, an increase of 1.6 million. That's out of the total $2 million proposed budget increase, right?
Correct.
So we're saying, okay, so most of the budget increase that we're looking for has nothing to do with field trips or anything. It's strictly salary and benefits.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. Salary and benefits and an increase in special ed as well. And then there was interest in seeing the overall increase on the different positions. So administration, teacher, paraeducator, custodian. So I picked, several and then summed up the rest, the others. And that includes your admin support, behavior specialists, substitutes. And that's at the bottom. Very little increase or impact on the overall expense budget.
Okay. Paul, did you have a comment or a question about that?
I'm sorry to do this, but I got a lot of questions. I spent yesterday and today going over this 97-page packet, just got the addendum this afternoon, and I have a number of questions that I'd like to get out there that I think are germane to the budget, just for clarity and understanding. I'd like to, if you could bear with me, refer back to the audit report that was out and relate to a particular document that came out on December 8th that showed that there was a tax stabilization of $957,962. I saw in another document that was on, which was a draft number 2 on 12/15, where 0 was being applied of that particular draft element. And then on 1/5/21, the $200,000 of that, what you call tax stabilization, was being applied in the budget that just got defeated. As I look at these numbers today, how much of that tax stabilization or balance fund is being used to offset this particular draft 4? That's my first of about a dozen questions. I apologize for that, but I do want to have some clarity on this. I'm trying to understand why we have a lot of the numbers we have. This is an awful lot to go through.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what your time frame is for tonight, but we are talking about a near $50 million complex here.
Mm-hmm. So, Paul, the fund tax stabilization fund balance as of June 30, 2020 was $917,000. We had to apply the deficit of approximately $300,000, and that's all in the audit report. So I don't have the exact numbers, in my head. So what that meant was we actually have about $644,000 available to use toward your as a fund balance, or to allocate to your budget as revenue. So to answer your second question, in this draft 4, we're applying $500,000 of your fund balance.
That represents what in percent on this overall budget? Are we going through the motions of saying we're going to use the fund balance to reduce the tax rate by itself, and the cuts that we're looking at, if there are cuts in here, are just incidental and nominal to this particular budget presentation?
Well, I wouldn't say that they are incidental. I think that a lot of thought and effort has gone into it.
Then what reductions are we looking at? Are we reducing staff? Are we reducing facilities? Are we reducing? I mean, I've gone through this. I've highlighted probably about 28 different points in this. I don't want to spend the committee's time on this, but This is such a short window to get this all out.
Right, so the document that just went out today is going to answer most of your questions, I think, I hope, at least some of them. If you want me to just continue to walk through it, we will come to the reductions at some point as we go along. So
I'll reserve my questions. Go ahead.
okay, thank you. So moving on to the next goal and priority from the board was to look at the audited fund balance. And so I've shared the pages from the actual audit to show you exactly what the fund balances were, and also noted that we would be using an additional $300,000 toward revenue. The next goal and priority is the question from Alice about the duplication of purchases, and then use the example about professional development and grants. And the consolidated federal programs, those are your title grants, are very strict, and there is a supplement, not supplant rule. So we do not supplant or use grant funds and duplicate them when it comes to supplies or professional development. In terms of the COVID funding, we do believe that there will be, some effect, and we will be able to utilize the reductions. You'll see where we're, taking advantage of those. At the same time, they're federal dollars as well, very strict requirements, and we can't supplant, but there are some positions that are not in the budget this current year that we were able to reduce going forward into next year. So you'll see those reductions. I also gave you a little information about ESSER 1 was a total of 1 million. ESSER 2 is 3.8 million. So that will really assist us in our recovery from COVID-19. And then there's a list of 12 permissible uses for those COVID dollars. And this is something that you spoke to, Paul, at the board meeting last Thursday, and that was, are there cuts that can be made because you felt that, maybe that the increase was a little too high. So this is where you'll see the cuts, as well as the allocation of the $300,000 for fund balance.
And for the committee, I would just point out that the cuts on this draft are in addition to cuts in the previous drafts.
Can I ask sorry, go ahead, Gina.
I'm just asking you, I think I know the answer, but the position cuts that you have here that say absorb in ESSER 1 and 2, are those positions essentially going to be rehired using the ESSER funds to cover those expenses?
In terms of the first one, which is listed as number 2, it's the reduction in special ed extended school year services. So the plan is to have a summer program, and we believe that we're going to be using ESSER funds to fund that summer program. And so our hope is that some of the expenses will be absorbed into the ESSER funds because we may not need in
Gina,
special
could
ed
you,
funding.
I'm sorry, Gina, could you mute? I think we're getting some feedback.
I can, but I have a follow-up question.
Okay.
And then the next one that we, so the two BIs were the other two positions, and the Berrytown behavior specialists.
Right. So I guess what I'm asking is, I mean, we've talked a lot about focusing on academic recovery and student supports that have been pretty seriously degraded this past year simply by circumstance. So when I see cuts where the only cuts in staff we're talking about are in special ed and special services, that makes me feel concerned. And so just to clarify for myself and for any members of the public, it sounds like what you're saying is that we're not losing these positions, but the funding is going to shift to ESSER, so they won't be impacting our budget. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Go ahead, Sonia.
Thanks. So follow up to that question, what happens, how long do ESSER funds last, and when do we have to reabsorb it back into the local budget?
That's a good question. I know that ESSER 2 funds are available until December 31st, 2023. However, we have heard that there's going to be an ESSER 3. So those could potentially, extend out longer. So at this point, over the next 2 years.
But so my question, I would be in theory fine with hiring more staff to help assist with additional services needed for students, because I think that is in the spirit of what the ESSER funds are trying to do. And then as students are catching up, then we don't need those anymore and we have a reduction in force, and then it's fine. But my problem is that we're going to have to absorb these back into the local budget at some point, which means we're just kicking the can down the road. That's a concern to me. So I'm just putting it out there for the rest of the committee, or for the committee to consider.
And if I could jump in just for a moment, there have been some folks putting comments in the chat feature. I wasn't able to turn that off. I usually do for meetings. It would work better if you held your comment and addressed the chair of the committee. That way everyone can hear it and address it. I just don't want anyone's comments to be missed. And Sonia, to your concern and Gina's, so I understand your concern is that if we shift funding for certain positions and their support positions to ESSER for this current year's work, the FY22 budget, how will we fund them in the future? And in our work to present this fourth draft to you, that was something that we were careful about, not to try to the least extent to use ESSER for things that would need to be included in the budget in the future. For item number 4, the BIs at the Spalding Ed Alternative Program, yes, so it's shifting $70,000 for FY22 to ESSER, but that is an area as we calculate future budgets that the expansion of C in the future over years will result in expenditure savings from not sending students to other programs. So that's one way to recoup that there. But I would say, Lisa, unless Lisa has a different thought about it, number 7, behavior specialist at Berrytown, including that in ESSER 2, would need to be included in a future budget in a few years out when ESSER goes away. And of course, right, we're spending ESSER 1 now to great benefit of the district, making plans for ESSER 2, which is substantial. And then have not seen what will be coming to us and expected a good amount of money from the American Recovery Act.
Lisa, can I ask items 3 and items 8, what kind of supplies and tech equipment are we cutting?
The reduction in tech equipment is more or less in the central office. So each school has a tech equipment line, and we didn't cut that, but we also feel like we can absorb any other expenditures for technology in ESSER, because that is one of the permissible uses. So we do believe that's an area we can use ESSER funds to support. And 8, I'm not sure exactly what the supplies, but they felt like they could reduce their general supply line by $10,000. And I believe right now it's sitting at about 90,000. So I think they felt comfortable doing that.
Right. Let me add to that last one. So the discussion around item number 8, as administration, we talked about how there is a substantial amount of funds in our supply lines right now for various reasons, COVID being one of them, that supplies this year were not spent down as they usually are. We're not talking about fund balance here, but FY21 dollars. And we felt comfortable having $10,000 of supplies, crayons, markers, papers, etc., that could be ordered in June rather than spending FY22 money for that.
Thank you.
So with those reductions, the next handout is the projected tax rate calculation, showing your overall expense budget less your revenues with the increase of the additional $300,000 in fund balance. And when you walk through that calculation, you'll see that our new ballot will show a per pupil spending of $15,554 per pupil at a 3.41% increase.
Paul, did you have a question?
Yeah, I still have a lot of questions, so bear with me. If I understand this, beyond the $300,000 additional cuts coming out of the tax fund balance, what is that dollar amount again that is also going into reduction from the cuts that we have here? Do you have a cumulative effect in that? I'm having a hard time finding this because it's got 25 pages in front of me. I'm trying to scan and shoot.
Sorry, $265,000 is the reduction from draft 3 to draft 4 in expenses. With the addition of the $300,000 in fund balance, we're reducing overall expenses $565,000.
That's using the fund balance
Yes, yeah.
dominantly. So as I look through this budget, and I see some wild numbers that fly all over, I'm not going to pick on anything. Well, maybe I will. I might actually isolate some things that I had a little bit of concern with. With the C project, let me throw that out first, because that was something that kind of concerned me. One of the things that I was concerned about was this is an area where we've already gone $1 million over budget just in the construction. I see a number of BIs being added to this area. I mean, I think there's 5 or 6 if I read this document correct. Is that true? That are being added for this particular new opening program.
So the original draft 3 had an additional 5, and our plans are to fund 2 of the 5 with ESSER funds.
So how many managers and administrators, teachers, and behavior interventionists do we have? And what is that relationship to the number of pupils that will be attending this program? Do we have any idea on that? Because that's a transient group.
The plan originally was to grow the program from 30 students to 45 in the first year. And in the second year, FY23, we would have 60 students. Hopefully middle school. We would include some middle school students as well.
But we don't have an actual understanding of what that number might look like at this point. I mean, we don't know what that student count would be. Are we going to be able to anticipate recapturing outside placements, for example? Well, I guess what I'm saying is this is a pretty expensive operation that we moved into. The idea of saving the district money over time. Right now, I'm wondering when we will actually either break even or actually have a reduction in this area in the expense to the district.
So we have over the last 2 years provided through presentations to the board several, cost analysis of the program, and overall, our first year, we may not see a significant savings, although we showed that our estimated per pupil costs for students attending C is somewhere around, say, $35,000. Some of these programs that we're sending students to are anywhere between $40,000 and $125,000. So bringing 2 students back will make a huge difference. But we're suggesting bringing 15 students back. So over the next 2 years, there will be a significant savings. And not only that, but we're bringing our students back to the community.
But that makes an assumption that we're not getting reimbursements for the students that we send out. Because remember, we talked about this many months ago, and we talked about anything that was over 50K, we would get a 60% reimbursement, and if it was higher than that 50,000, it would be 90% reimbursements. What I'm trying to understand is what does that differential do for us, and what does that give us for a bottom line on where we actually start saving money? Because that was one of the reasons why I know I went out, and I know Sonia did, to sell this program, so that we would get tax credit. I still believe in the program, but I'm concerned about the startup costs and the number of personnel we're adding right now. It seems like it's one of the fastest growing areas. I mean, we could talk about special ed next, but I'm talking about this specifically because that's one of the larger numbers. I mean, I'm looking at somewhere maybe I'm wrong, somewhere in the nature of between $800,000 and $1 million in signing up and personnel and so forth. Am I missing something here that I'm not seeing?
So we understood we would have an increase this first year, but next year you're going to recoup savings because you've already budgeted for your facility and your staffing, but you also will be bringing more students back to the program, back to the community.
So somewhere along the line, you would be able to show a definitive line of expenses, adding a personnel, minus the incomes that we would actually save in those expenses going out to other schools.
Yes.
And how soon will we be able to get an understanding on that? Like, I guess that's my question, because I'm looking at total bodies being put into this stuff. And I'm looking at how we're expanding administratively, and that always gives us a black eye out in the community. It's always been a thing that, and I'll talk about a couple other things too, but this is kind of important because we've really put our reputations out on this one.
So in terms of the administration, very little increase. We have one administrator for the C program. We're not adding another administrator.
Okay, thank you on that point. I have another question, and maybe I don't know if I should direct this to Mr. Wells or not, but we talked about the MTSS adding what I think is an administrative person to the central office for this. And I asked two questions at the last board meeting, and I want to be clear on those answers. One was, this was going to be funded by grant money. And the second question was, what will happen when the grant money ended? And I'm going to piggyback what Sonia had said a little while ago. When that money runs out, that position ends. Is that still clear? And the third question I have to follow that up with is, why do we need it? Is there something we could be doing within our relative buildings that could absorb an MTSS upgrade without having to have one more administrative person added to central office?
Yes, so the MTSS coordinator, to the first part of your question, will be grant funded through the ESSER grants and the American Recovery Act. And that funding should run for at least 2 years, and we'll see the timeline for the American Recovery Act. And also then after that, we can look to see if it can be fit into the consolidated federal grant, or if it cannot be and cannot be fit within the budget, then we would need to reduce it. However, the state is requiring a position like this, but I want to say importantly, even before the state required this, this is something that I see as a need for the district. As a merged district, we have a number of different people who have been in charge of the many different parts of a multi-tiered system of supports. So different people looking at data, different people running EST plans, 504 plans, etc. They're doing a good job. However, it's not coordinated. It's not targeted in the way it needs to be to close the achievement gaps. We have to have a lot sharper focus. This person is going to be a key player in the recovery plan that the state is expecting of us. That they expect a needs assessment, they expect strategies, and for our students, number one, we expect to see closing achievement gaps. So that's the important role that this position plays, and something that, in my professional opinion, the district needs.
I'm not positively been convinced just yet, so I just want to have a follow-up question. What does this person do? Do we roll out some of the other personnel from the buildings that are doing part of this work anyhow, and all of a sudden we're just directing that to a central person that coordinates this? Is that what you're telling me?
So this person will have a number of duties. They include implementing and analyzing student achievement data. It'll include organizing and supervising interventionists across the district. It'll include coordinating of services between the building principals and the staff that do the interventions. It will include work on the school recovery team. There's a whole host of duties for this position that were undertaken by a variety of different individuals, and it's been a shortcoming of the district, though, that this has not been coordinated, and that's the purpose behind this grant-funded position.
And do you have somebody in mind for this type of role from either in the district or out of the district? There must be some sort of plan set for this.
There are some internal candidates who I hope would apply, but we are also going to post it, make it an open posting as well, so we get the best suited person for this.
As a personal note on that, I'm getting extremely leery about more administrators coming into a central office capacity. Between administrators and assistant administrators, I look at that entire central office situation, and that's the one area where the budget continually goes up. I look at some of what the schools are trying to do, and they're trying to make cuts. And somehow there seems to be an imbalance. I just throw that out there because there are optics that happen out there. And it's one of the many things that we hear, or I used to hear all the time. I'm sure other board members probably will say the same thing from the constituents, the voters, the taxpayers on this. And it's one of the reasons why we had looked at the consolidation as being something that was going to save us money. And that's a question that gets thrown at me almost every week. So that's why I bring that up. Is it the chair's intent to review this budget segmentedly, or is this the full budget presentation with this amount going back to the board for its approval?
I think right now we're just in the discussion stage. I mean, this is just presented to us today. So, I've got a couple of other committee members who have comments or questions. Gina, I think you've been waiting patiently.
I think it kind of came up between Paul and Lisa's exchange about C, but what I was going to say is that, I understand, Lisa, it's a little hard because we're sort of asking you to predict the future, and the financials of C, it's hard to give us exact details because it doesn't exist yet. So I was going to echo Paul's question of when, it seems like at some point prior to the start of the school year, we'll know who's enrolled in that program. So we'll be able to get an immediate idea of whether or not we've pulled any other students back in for this year. And then I don't know what the enrollment timeline is like for that, but I think, the point's certainly been made that we are going to want to be able to, we're going to want to see that long-term payoff for ourselves, and also because, it is something that community members ask about.
Sarah, if I may, I can offer a partial response to that question.
Sure, go ahead.
So we have been keeping a running list this year of students who the C program has already brought back from outside placements. And I was just making a calculation, and we're at currently about $465,000 in contracts that we've been able to move back this year in anticipation of the new building, and looking at probably a couple of more by the end of the year in the summer. So I think if the committee would like, we can certainly bring you some clear data on that in the next couple of months.
Great. Thank you. Renee, did you have a question or a comment?
I do. I'm just wondering if there has been any discussion about bringing in students from other districts to help bring in some extra revenue on this. Is it solely for students who are in the Barre area, or are you trying to bring in other people? Because that's really where you could make a huge amount of money.
That's a good question. We have, in our discussions over the last few years, definitely have talked about other school districts that I know have approached Stacy to say, this is an amazing, thing that you're doing. We're really, the capacity in some of these outside placements is really struggling. And so I know we've had a difficult time. Other schools have said, do you have, spaces for our students? So yes, that's in the plan as well. Not, I don't think this year, because again, we're just building and growing the program this year. but certainly next year. The other reason for this building and this program is Act 173, and that's the change to the funding formula, to the special ed funding formula, which really would have will hit us very hard if we hadn't have done something to, you know, these exorbitant costs for outside placements.
Alice, did you have a comment? Alice, you're still muted.
Yes, two comments. Out of any kind of crisis comes opportunity, and I think this would be a good time to grab the opportunity to look at our long range practices, and as well as our buying practices. That I often notice in going through the warrants that there are things purchased during the course of the school year that could be purchased in anticipation of the school year. There are a lot of buying from Amazon or the local bookstore, things like that. As the need that we're going to read this book comes up, now I need to buy 28 copies. Quite possibly in that long range planning, be able to buy your 28 copies at the end of one school year in anticipation of the next year. So to look at that long range planning and buying practices. And the other piece is surrounding the MTSS coordinator, that if we have people who are putting together a lot of the bits and pieces throughout the district, and then those bits and pieces are now going to be put in the hands of an administrator or coordinator, whatever that person, what is going to become of those other people who ordinarily did that before? Is that going to be a reduction in staff? Is that going to be some kind of a change of their placement as a staff member? How is all that going to sugar out as we go along with this additional person? Which I'll just share with you that I'm not quite convinced yet. You can still try to convince me, but I'm having a little trouble grasping that.
Okay, thank you, Alice. To answer your question, so a couple of examples of how we would use staffing for this. Take a look at the coordination of interventionists. That has been done by individuals who have also been asked to coach in both of our schools to support best practices in instruction. That's a vital part of growing your staff, but they've been asked to coach and to coordinate interventionists and to collect data and to enroll kids on the digital roster for Star 360. And what has fallen by the wayside is the coaching duties and supporting practices and growing your teaching force, which is critical to increased outcomes. So an MTSS coordinator takes the supervision of interventionists off their plate, so they're not having to think of interventionist schedules, etc. And that's done in a coordinated fashion across the town and the city, looking at caseloads, looking at the best practices for intervention. So that's one example. Another example is there are individuals, it happens differently in different schools, but there are individuals who've been given stipends to help coordinate ESTs. But again, that's many different people doing that job and not doing it in one focused, coordinated way. You know, again, the demands of the recovery plan from the state are going to be large. And I anticipated that starting with Barry 35 and have discussions about MTSS coordination throughout the year. But districts of our size are using a resource like this because we need to use the resources we have and coordinate them so that we get the student outcomes that we want. And when we look at our data, it's showing us not only with COVID-19, but essentially historically, our data shows us that we need higher student outcomes.
Sonia, you had a question?
Yeah, so Lisa, I know you've answered this before, so can you please just remind me what do we have in the in the budget right now for contracted increases for our teaching staff? I know we had reduced it originally, but I'm wondering what did we end up at? And then I'm also wondering what is the amount of increase for non-contracted staff? And if that was discussed at all, reducing any of those lines, because when you look at the fact that our budget just for salary and wages is $25 million and admin staff is 1.9 million. If we can reduce the increases to those lines, that would be, I think, a fairly sizable reduction just by making some kind of a cut there. And I'd like to make sure that we have them both the same. I'm not sure if they are at this point.
So reducing teachers,
Well,
admin, and non-contracted.
What are teachers at right now?
Teachers are at 2% now,
Okay, and what is non-contracted at?
3%.
Okay, so if we reduce the non-contracted to 2% to match the teachers, that would be a reduction on the 1.8 million from the FY20, or it'd be a reduction of the 1.9 for the FY20 proposed FY22 budget. Is that correct?
So you're looking at administration is the 1.9, correct?
Yes.
So are you suggesting bringing the 3 to a 2%?
Yes. Yes.
And for all the other non-contracted, which would be behavior interventionists and all others. So the last two.
That's
rows.
another $3 million in those two rows.
Correct.
So you're looking at almost $5 million. Well, definitely $5 million and change. So was that discussed at all to match the increase that we have currently in the budget for teachers or contracted staff? And if not, can we discuss that?
Sure, we can discuss it. I think you have to be, we have to be cautious about that. For one, when we are looking at teachers, this is budget to budget. So it's not actuals at this point. And we typically will have some savings in the breakage, meaning that through attrition, you know, the more experienced teachers who have been in the district will have moved out, and the less experienced teachers moving in will be lower on the salary scale. So that gives you some room, depending on what happens with negotiations.
Oh, I completely understand that. And I know I advocated for it, and I'm completely fine with it being at 2%. I guess my question is, can we talk about reducing the non-contracted staff to match the 2%? And the simple fact is, I don't think that we should be reducing the number of staff that we have, because in this time and the challenges that we're having, we can't really afford to have less people if we have kids who need more services and more support. So how do we have the same number of people and pay less? We don't have as high of an increase. That's my suggestion, my recommendation.
So I see Alice has a hand up perhaps, but then I have a thought to add to this.
In that same circle, do we have any kind of an estimate as to what our student population will be next year? Can we begin to hone in on that and make sure that we have, we're not planning for either a larger or a much smaller capacity in the schools?
Right, let me answer that question first. And I don't have it in front of me, but at our last board meeting, we shared the enrollment, the most up-to-date February enrollments, showing that our staffing for our enrollment right now is sitting in the right range for the school districts determine minimum and maximum classroom sizes. So I would not recommend reducing staff because we anticipate having students come back, and that could push us over. Now, speaking about students coming back, you know, we did do a survey, perhaps it was January. It was low participation in the survey from families. We sent surveys to every person who had enrolled in an alternative school or had moved to homeschooling, et cetera. And I don't have those numbers. Perhaps Josh on the call might remember them, but the participation was low. We certainly can send that out again. But my bottom line point is I don't see a way that we could reduce staff. And that sort of goes to Sonia's point that you would want staff. The other thing, two other points that I want to make about percentage increases in salaries. And I want to be really clear, I'm not talking about the superintendent's salary, but I am talking about non-contracted salaries across the SU. When you look at comparables, and I know we're in a tough budget, but when you look at comparables, and not Chittenden County comparables, but Bennington, Rutland, Bradford, blue-collar town comparables, we are below the comparables for administrators. And no one's, you know, I want to be really clear, no one's giving me ultimatums, but you want administrators who will stay. And when they look at comparables to, you know, drive over to Rutland or another blue collar town, you want to be fair and keep the force that you have. And then my other comment would be is I recommend the committee think about the overall goal in our budget work here. We want to be smart about our money and be responsible to the citizens of Berrytown, Berry City. If you look at the tax rate sheets, we're looking at decreases in tax rates in both the town and the city. And at our previous board and communication committee conversations, we also talked about having a successful budget this next time out is in part with money, yes, and having that that 3.45, I don't have the number in front of me, that percentage increase on the per pupil cost will be important. But I think the other part will be showing the story of Barry, showing parents what they'll be having next year, and basically building confidence. I mean, to put it succinctly, we had taxpayers call us and say, hybrid learning did not work for my kid. That's why I voted no for the budget. So it's part addressing those issues, and it's also part money. So those are my comments.
Any comments or questions from anyone else?
I have a couple more comments.
Okay.
I'm going to sound like a broken record. But one of the things that I've been hearing lately is that anything over 3% is just too much. From the workforce to everything else that's out there, the 3% seemed to be a number that seems to be a pivotal point. When we were dealing with negotiations, it was the same thing that we tried to express to our employee, that can we come to something that's at least under 3%? We couldn't do that either. There's too many perceptions, I think, that goes into why budgets go down. It is a money question. It is a perception question. It is the events that we've gone through. We've gone through a lot of them. But I still would encourage a committee to look at what would it take to get under 3%, because I think that's a make or break number that might determine whether this passes or not. And I don't know what 0.41 actually means at this point, but from what I'm seeing here, knowing that we have RIF notices that would have to go out by April 1st, I believe that's still the accurate date. If we don't have anything in there and this thing goes down again, where are you going to go to for potential cuts if you don't have that in your plan? You know, this is something, you know, I'd like to see us get a budget passed, and we have to be reasonable and logical about this. Stacy, you said something earlier about bringing back 464,000 or something of that nature from bringing back students with the C. But I see here about a $500,000 increase. So is, in fact, there a concern about the reimbursement as being part of that offsets some of that? I'm trying to understand why we have that $500,000 increase in the budget line of what I got yesterday. Now, that's changed today. I haven't seen it.
Which budget line are you referring to, Paul?
Well, they're not numbered, and I wish we had, this is a page that was titled Barry Unified Union School District FY22 Proposed Budget Expense Summary, and this was dated draft 3. And it has 4 columns, one showing the FY20, the FY20 actuals, the FY21 expenses, and the proposed budget that I thought now has been supplanted by the one we just received tonight. But it has a list of all the BUUSD budgets, the school budgets for each of the schools and so forth, broken down by areas. It's 2 pages, and it ends with a number of $50,492,000. And I'm looking at the second page, particularly where it says BUUSD C program, and it showed the FY21 expenses at $552,000 and the proposed budgets being $970,463. I'm trying to get my head wrapped around that, because I like what you said before, that if we bring enough students back, this program not only pays for itself, but it actually should give us some sort of surplus to help in the expansion of that program, which is why we have planned that building for an expansion if we needed it. Help me understand that.
So maybe Lisa can help out too, but I think you're looking at 2 different lines. Because the C line would be additional expenses that we anticipate for next year in order to expand that program. If I'm understanding you correctly, that's the line you're looking at. The line that we will eventually be reducing from is a tuitions line, and that's where we place the expenses for students who are placed out of district. Am I correct, Lisa?
Yes, so you're correct. Yep. The C program does have an increase, and that is exactly what you explained, that there's additional staffing. Mm-hmm. We spoke about that earlier, the 5 BIs, 2 teachers, some additional counseling services.
But that's my whole point. We're moving from an area of the fiscal year 21, which showed 552,108, to the proposed, I mean, this is what I picked up yesterday, proposed of 970,463. It involves all of those positions. It's a substantial increase. And Stacy just got through telling us a short while ago that there is a savings that's coming from bringing students back. Where is that reflected as an offset to this?
Well, you won't see it immediately. would be in your expenses going forward.
But we're putting out a budget, and you made a statement that we're having a savings coming in from students coming back out of district, which I understand. But we're not going to see it in this proposed budget, is what you're telling me.
Correct. That's right. Because we've built a building, so we needed to added the facility costs and the additional staffing.
So my original question was, do we need to do all of this at this time in order to have a more balanced budget, or maybe to get us down below maybe that 3% level? Because I looked at the other part of this too, which was the special ed, and there was about a $470,000 increase in 3 lines above that. And when I put the two together, that's a $970,000 increase. And you're trying to sell a budget, and you've got 2 lines like this, and I mean, I could go down through this whole thing here, but we don't have time. That's the issue. And if we're considering any kind of cuts of positions or anything like that, we got to be cognizant of that April 1st date. At least that's what I remember from past years. Okay.
It looks like we've got a hand up, Melinda Howard.
That's actually, my name is Josh Howard, and I just wanted to say that I did vote no on the budget when I did vote, and one of the main reasons is the cost. We just had a giant increase last year to school budget, a ridiculous amount. We went ahead and barely passed. The 6% this year was ridiculous. Even at 3%, I'd be happier, but I'd like to see it under 2%. Like I said before, what if everyone's bills went up 3%? All your bills. How many people would that hurt? It's unsustainable, and we got to get it down.
Thank you. Gina?
Thanks. Sorry, I've got some stuff happening here. I have 2 things to say. I wanted to, the document that Paul just got us into, I did have a few questions or things to note on that. And I also wanted to respond. I'm sorry, I think it was Josh, please forgive me. But just, I know that the increase is frustrating, and I just want to remind everybody who's watching and everybody who's reading this in the paper that the vast majority of this increase, it's salary and it's really expenses. If you look at our increase in medical expenses, it's enormous, and that is something that we cannot manage unless we cut positions. And so I think that we all feel super frustrated about that. I wanted to jump in. There's just a few lines. Is this an appropriate time to go into the expense summary draft 3 to go through and look at a few lines there? Okay, so I had a question about some increases, and I was actually comparing schools. I really like how this is set up because it's nice to be able to compare the buildings. Both schools had Berry City had a pretty significant increase in the principal's office, and Berrytown had a slight increase. So I was curious about the origins of that almost $100,000 increase in Berry City. There were increases, and some of these, like I'm assuming the health increase I flagged, I'm assuming that that's actually probably benefits associated with the positions. I don't understand why we have anything in the budget for field trips. I don't understand why there's an increase in athletics. I really wish people would stop making me publicly say athletics, because I know that I'm going to get skewered in the media, but I don't understand why there's an increase and not a decrease there. And oh gosh, I wish I was ending on something else. And then I also just want to note, I know we've talked about it before, but when we're looking at equity in schools, the BT MES duplicating position does not have an equivalent position in either one of the other schools. So that is a $56,000 expense for BT EMS duplicating that is not in the other schools. So that was a lot, and I rattled it off quickly, but those were the lines that jumped out at me.
Well, I know Hayden is on the call, so he can speak to the principal's office.
Yes, I might need your assistance, Lisa, but it's kind of unfortunate how it laid out, because it's that $100,000 increase in the principal's office is actually a savings of about $40,000. But because in the past we had the registrar was listed under our guidance budget, and then there was 2 positions listed under the transportation budget. Both of those, as we restructure our office, they moved into the principal's line. And so that we actually reduced our office staff from what was 8 full-time staff members 3 years ago when Chris and I began at Berry City. We now have 5 full-time staff members, 3 of them being year-round. So it's funky how it lays out on the documents, but that's why we increased. Where overall it might be a decrease or it might stay level funded because of other people's insurances and pay raising, but it's right about level, if that makes sense for everybody.
So thank you.
So my next line was Berrytown transportation for field trips. Look, I'm not trying to be a curmudgeon. We all love a good field trip, but it feels like it feels extraneous at this point.
I can jump into that, but also one of the Berrytown principals might want to join, or Hayden as well. So in a traditional sense, field trips have been funded differently at both buildings. I know that Berry City has a great fundraising effort, so that has been their tradition to have money for field trips. So they have, and they do secure money for field trips. And traditionally, Berrytown has made the decision to put this into the budget rather than having the fundraising effort for that. That's those traditions are take time to evolve, and that's why they're presented in the budget this way. But just to say in short, students at both schools have the opportunities for field trips. Erica, I don't know if you want to join in, or Hayden or Jen.
Yeah, thanks, David. This is Erica. Actually, Gina, that's just for transportation. So previously, Berrytown owned their own transportation. And when we had to consolidate that to central office, we were forced to use a transportation company that took over our buses. So we do fundraise, and that pays for the actual the PTO does an amazing job, actually, of helping to pay for the actual field trip itself. And that $25,000 that we had originally was to offset so that each class could have $1,000 to attend one field trip a year. That wasn't the total cost. It cost about $1,300 to run a bus to Burlington for a field trip. So that's the history of it. Just wanted to make sure that you knew that piece.
Sonia, did you have a comment on that?
Absolutely. So I was part of the tradition, the starting of the tradition of the fundraising, and I wouldn't call it a tradition that's evolved because we wanted to raise money. We had to raise money. So I'm going to push back a little bit and say I understand that this has evolved, and we've been doing it for close to probably 14 or 15 years. But if we want to talk about equity, I think you can either cut $25,000 from transportation for field trips, or you can add $25,000 for Berry City. It's really frustrating that the kids at Berry City are completely, their field trips are completely determined by how much money they raise in their classes. So they don't have extra money for transportation. Everything is determined by how much they raise. And yes, I think everyone should have the opportunity to go on a field trip, but if their class doesn't raise enough money, they, are very limited in what they can do. So while I understand, I wouldn't advocate necessarily for cutting it. And here we are discussing cuts to the budget. I'd say add $25,000 in for Berry City to make it fair, and we can move on. And I think you could find that money if you cut the duplicating clerk.
Okay, we've got a couple more hands up. Gina, were you all set? Your hand's still up.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I guess I'm not clear on if we're leaving this meeting with an approved budget to take back to the board, or if there's going to be another review opportunity, because I think that there are a couple things up in the air. I mean, I think that field trips should be reviewed. I think that duplicating clerks should be reviewed. I really take to heart Sonia's point about equity. I think that we've talked about that a lot, and it's rare that we have a chance to see that in action lined out in a budget. And here's a couple of instances. So are we going to have another meeting to review and approve before this goes back to the board, or is this it?
So based on our schedule, this would be our last meeting as a finance committee, and we were hoping to bring a recommendation, or the finance committee would bring a recommendation to the board next Thursday. So that was my hope, that we would walk away from here knowing, what we were bringing to that board meeting. And if it means that you're looking for a 3% increase, anything below 3% or below, then that's some direction that would be helpful.
I think you've heard from a couple members of the community that have asked for that. I think 2% is probably not realistic. We are looking at actually cutting positions there, and it pains me to cut positions in lieu of benefits. But a few meetings ago, someone recommended going through and just flatlining a lot of items on the budget. And I think I applaud you on the broad areas where you found savings. I know that that's really challenging, and I recognize that there's been a lot of work done. But I'm curious if there was an effort to go through and, flatline some of these, $5,000, $10,000 increases that I think just happen as kind of a matter of course, if there's some more money that could be pulled out without getting into something huge like actual position cuts. I also understand that we're on a bit of a tight time frame, and I don't know how to manage that, in terms of timing and approval prior to getting back to the board. But it seems like that I don't think we're talking about a tremendous amount of money to take it out to get it below the 3%, probably 400,000. It'd just be interesting to see if there's little chunks that could come off to help bring it down.
Okay, we've got a lot of hands up. Josh Howard.
Yes. I talked before, but I'll talk again. The question is why health insurance costs we have to pay for the teachers, even though we have to pay for our own increases as well. It seems a bit fiscally irresponsible. I also had a question. I came across a paid video ad a while back for Spalding High School, and I wonder if that's kind of the irresponsible spending that we're going to be getting into as well.
So I have an answer to a couple of those. It may be that Josh left the meeting. So health benefits are negotiated for Vermont teachers on a statewide basis. So we had mentioned earlier that when you have teachers, that comes with a package. That's not something that we can negotiate down or change. So that's the one. And I was going to ask, looks like Josh might be back. Josh, I was answering your question. So the health benefits are negotiated on a statewide basis. That's the law in Vermont. And so that's the reason that a school district, whether it's Barre, Burlington, what have you, cannot change those parameters. I had a question for you. You would expressed a concern about a promotional video. I'm not sure which one you might have been talking about.
Oh, it came up on a Facebook ad and then a YouTube ad as well.
I can answer to that if you want, David.
Sure. I know that. Go ahead, Josh.
Yeah, so the video that he's referring to is the video that the students in CVCC's digital media arts class made, talking about the school district. And I did not run a Facebook ad, so maybe it just showed up in your news feed. But I did run a YouTube ad, and they cost roughly about 3 cents per view, basically. And a view is not calculated as like you just saw the ad and you skipped it. A view is actually watching the entire video. So we reached over, I believe it was 12,900 people. With that advertisement, and it costs roughly $120. And that was all people in the Barry area, because it was, not targeted outside of that. So that was, very, affordable way of advertising and doing outreach compared to, other things that we've done in the past.
When we're trying to nickel and dime a budget down and we're sending an ad out to people that don't have a school choice, well, first, I guess, who are you targeting, and how is it okay to spend a little bit if it wasn't over, say, $10,000? Even $100 is too much. We're trying to cut a budget.
And I would just add that that's part of the communications budget, and some of the goals of the communications committee for school promotion. So it might be something to discuss at the communications committee. But just to answer your question, it is within our communication budget.
It seems like we can probably cut that a little bit then.
Oh, Sarah, I'm sorry, you're muted.
Sorry, Renee, you had a comment or question?
Yeah, I have a couple things. So I think that just listening to this discussion that just happened, I think that one important thing to remember is that we do have local schools that do have school choice. So we've got Orange, Washington, Waits River Valley School. All of those schools, they get to choose where they go for high school. And so if we spend $120 and we can get 2 or 3 of those kids in, the tuition alone will be well worth the money spent. And as well, when thinking about the budget, I'm very wary to put a certain number on it, be it 3.5%, 3%, 2%. Just because if we end up, losing a really good teacher because we were trying to get to that number, that makes me really nervous. So I certainly understand that if people are feeling like there needs to be cuts, then there needs to be cuts. But just being really wary of putting a specific number on stuff can really, I think, hurt morale within the schools and in the community. So I just wanted to share that.
Thank you. Gina, did you have more?
No, sorry. Thank you. I'm good.
Okay. Paul, you did have your hand up at one point.
Yes, I still do. I thank you for that, Madam Chair. I just have some observations, and it took me a little hunting this morning, quite a bit of hunting actually, to figure out what the differentials were between Barry City, Barry Town elementary schools and the high school, and in the areas of increase. When I looked at Barry City Elementary School, in a particular line dealing with the direct district cost, instruction that is, there was about a $266,000 increase. And in Barrytown, there was a $258,000 increase. And the one that threw me, and I'm hoping I can get an answer, was the Spalding one, where it had a negative 76,000 actually. I was able to track out the first two, and I assumed that the third one would be the same. That predominantly the 266 and the 258 was because of the increase in healthcare costs that we just received, both in the premium increases and in the negotiated settlement that we had last year that was kind of a 2-year deal. But I don't understand the high school, because when I looked at 2 years ago, that high school was at $4,051,000, and right now it's at $4,410,000. I mean, it's almost running level. So knowing that we had about $200,000, $250,000 each on the healthcare increase, what actually occurred with the high school budget in order to be almost perfectly level funded? Is Brenda willing to ascertain that question?
I'm here, Paul. Lisa may have to help me out with this particular sheet, because I'm not exactly sure what she's encompassing in the $4.4 million figure, but I did have some staff cuts, and I did have a reallocation. So if you look a couple lines down, there's the SHS behavior support, which was previously 0 and then was 57,000. So that was it was at one point a teacher position that I changed out, and the teacher position was a little higher than the behavior support person. So there was some cost savings there, but that also accounts for that bigger discrepancy. And I did have another staff cut in that line item, as well as a couple of para positions.
But your health care did go up, obviously, and that had to be at least $250,000. Am I correct? Either one of you?
I would assume the health increase is in the same rate as everyone else's.
So not to belabor this too much longer, my understanding was, and I think Guy brought this up at the last board meeting, is that there's going to be a bunch of money coming in related to COVID. My understanding is that we have had a large balance forward, because I remember when we formed this, we used up pretty much what I thought was the tax stabilization funds in order to get that first year's budget passed. So when I and other board members saw this number, we were a little bit surprised, and perhaps shame on me for not attending more of the finance meetings to see some of those numbers. But what I have observed is that if we have a number of federal dollars coming in, and all of a sudden the equalized pupil expenses are changing, and we're banking on CLA and so forth, are we saying that we can't reduce this budget, knowing that we probably will have a very strong infusion to get this below 3%, or even closer to 2%, to make this really saleable so you don't have to come back and do this again? Lisa?
So we have identified some positions and, expenditures in the budget that we can absorb into the COVID funding. So we have taken that into consideration. Again, you've given us some information. If you're saying that you believe if we brought this down to a 3%, that it would be more palatable, then I think we can work with that.
So to answer that too, though, earlier in our conversation, we were expressing caution of shifting too many items to ESSER, because ultimately ESSER will sunset, and we may still have the need. So that's one reason for the caution of only doing that to a certain extent. And I'd be interested in hearing, more from the committee if their guidance on a certain percentage or other guidance that they might have.
I would also add that, when we're looking at a per pupil cost of $15,554, and we know that the state average is $17,133. Again, I feel like, when David spoke about the comparables, opportunities for our students, I think it's important to look at that and understand, what is important and how much do you want to cut from this budget.
I want to jump in on that, because we've talked about that for years, and we've always been at the bottom of the heap. I understand that. Obviously, the voters this last time around did not take that into consideration, and we had a squeaker a year ago to try to get this budget passed. What is my hope and desire is that one of the questions I still want to get in is the last question, and I'm going to end that part of it. What kind of a surplus are we going to have, inclusive of COVID monies and whatever else have you, that's going to be reflected at above and beyond tax stabilization? Do we have any such monies?
At this point in the year, the projection shows about $600,000 in surplus.
And that's
Projected,
it. And that's in addition to the tax stabilization funds.
yes.
So it sounds like there may be a margin there which you can work and put this thing to rest quickly. That's just a question.
Paul, are you asking, I don't think we can't use this year's surplus until at least the fund, it's been audited. Is that correct, Lisa? So we have to work within what's in the tax stabilization fund now. It's great that we're expecting a surplus this year, but we can't actually use that yet.
I agree with you, Sarah. I totally agree with you. And I know that Lisa always gives us conservative projections, which at the end of the day usually are low. And I'm just looking for methodology without eviscerating what is an education platform, and trying to nibble around the edges and trying to eliminate things that may be deemed not absolute and necessary to education. Administrative assistants and things of that nature. I'm just throwing that out there because we've taken it on the chin. The last thing we want to have is another failed budget. And in order to get to that, the message that I'm receiving, I don't know about the rest of the board members are receiving, but the message I'm getting is that 3%, anything over 3% is way too high. I've had people saying, well, based upon the monies that you have coming in and a tax fund balance, why is that, and why should we be wanting to increase the budget at all? And I tell them it's because the health insurance has gone up through the roof. We have negotiated contracts we have no choice over. And then I think when we look at personnel and benefits, that's really 70% of your budget, and that's really where the meat and potatoes fall. And if you're talking about education, it's your faculty. So what does it take to move this thing off the center and make this dying pitch towards getting a past budget? I think it's got to be under 3%. That's my last comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Sonia?
So I hear what you're saying, Paul, but I also think that, I think you also were the one to tell me that parents were unhappy, and that's what David was also saying. So my concern is that we could cut this, parents could still be unhappy and force us for another vote and then have to cut again. And I don't think cutting is where, I don't think we want to cut so much that we're not able to provide the opportunities for our students. And thinking that we have COVID money isn't going to help us, because we're going to have to add those back into a local budget, which means we're going to then come back next year and say, oh, hey, we have to add this back in, or 2 years from now. And we're not doing ourselves any favors by doing that, because we're just basically pushing it off to, whoever gets to be the lucky finance committee in 2 or 3 years. And I think we have to be careful about that. As I said earlier, if we wanted to add positions to use COVID money, and then when that runs out, say, okay, well, we've used these intervention services, we've used these extra mental health support services, positions to help our students who've gone through, COVID and have gaps in their achievement, then that's fine. And that doesn't do anything to our budget. But I think to cut it, so then we have to come back to where we are and then go back, that doesn't make sense. And I would really recommend against that.
I'm not disagreeing with a thing you said, Sonia. In fact, I agree with everything you said. The point that is still outstanding is we don't have anything dealing with RIF notices, and you come back to another budget vote, what are you going to do? That's my concern.
Gina, do you have comments?
I know, I'm smiling, remembering a few years ago when John Pandolfo suggested we just give RIF notices to everybody because we couldn't figure out the budget in time. That was my little smile there. No, I think Renee might have her hand up.
Renee?
I'm all set, thank you.
So I'm not sure, where we're at this point. But one thing that I did want to say is that you have some very experienced administrators who put a lot of time and effort into this, and I would hope that you would respect their work and what they believe in their expert opinion, what's needed. So I leave you with that. And also, when this committee makes a decision and we decide that we're bringing this to the board, I also would really hope that everybody's in support of it, because it makes a big difference when the board is behind something, and it's not just the administrators. So I hope we can rally together.
Thank you, Lisa. We've got just a couple more raised hands. Josh Howard.
Yes, but I was wondering, why is it always discussed that you have to eliminate teaching positions rather than like administration and non-teaching positions to balance a budget? I guess I'll continue, because I would suggest not cutting teaching positions if they have a job to do, but I do know that our area has an excessive amount of administrators in our school district. Like, for instance, we have like 2 principals in some schools. That makes no sense.
I hear the concern. When you look at school quality standards put out by the State Board of Education, we're within those frameworks. I understand the concern about the cost of administration, and I understand the interest in keeping teachers, and I share that. But we are within, with the size of our schools, some of the largest schools in Vermont, we're within those boundaries for school quality standards under the State Board of Education.
Alice, do you have a comment?
Yes, just a quick comment, and this is the end for me. Appreciating all that goes into taking parents into consideration, but it is the entire community, and this has always been my focus. It is the entire community that votes on a school budget, and we need to take those situations into consideration as well. The anticipated rate of inflation for 2021 is 2.24%. Individuals who are living on a fixed income, those Social Security pensioners, their increase was 1.8%. So as you're thinking about a budget and doing that, take that into consideration as well, that those folks are part of this process as well, that the entire community is looking to do the right thing for the schools, but they also have to be able to eat and pay the rent. So I'll leave you with that thought.
Thank you. I'm getting the feeling from comments that the committee and some outside, some other people have mentioned that this may not be the exact budget that we want to bring to the board meeting next week. We've heard suggestions about cutting non-contracted increases, cutting individual lines. So I just kind of want to gather what the rest of my committee's feeling. Do we want to have more conversation about this? Do we want to meet again? Do we want to hold off and see what else we should be looking for? Renee?
So I guess from my point of view, having been in education for about 20 years, is that we were one of the only school budgets in the state that went down. And many of them were at 4, 5, 6%, and they all passed. So I would just wonder, I'm still wondering, is it really that we need to get under 3%? Or is there, as David had mentioned, part of it was part of the remote piece. And are there other things that are going on in our community that either we're not recognizing, we don't know about, that are going on that had this, I think we were 1 out of 3 in the state that went down. So I question that it's just a percentage, because like I said, schools all around us have bigger increases than this district, and they were approved with flying colors. So I'm just, I question if there's other things going on that should be addressed instead of cutting jobs and cutting people, because as Paul mentioned, in school budgets, that's what it is. You cut pencils and paper, you're not cutting anything. It ends up being people's jobs and people's lives. And so I think it's cutting people's jobs is a really big deal. And so paying attention to that just to get to a number makes me a little nervous. And I think there might be some more time to look at what is really going on here and what are the real reasons why people voted it down. Is it really because it's over 3%, or is there other stuff going on?
Thank you. Gina?
I thank you, Renee. Thanks for saying that. And I think that when you look at the votes, the spread of votes that we got in our packet last week, we really see that that all of the other financial questions for the school were passed, and it was just the budget that wasn't passed. And it was sort of a reversal of who normally votes down the budgets. I don't know. I think that we know what people. Sorry, I've got covered in children right now. I apologize. I think that we know what people's issues were because they came and they told us what they are. I don't know that we can fix that in time for a board meeting next week. And I think that I think that David has talked a lot about kind of the next stages. I'm sorry, please be quiet. The repair process right now. I think that's going to be like a long-term thing. So I get that, but I think that it's a good caution that we don't want to get in an endless cycle of budgets being voted down for other reasons, and we continue to cut money because we have to cut money to get another budget vote out there, and then the next thing we know, we're chopping the budget down past any reasonable measure.
Okay, thank you. Chris?
Thanks, Sarah. I wanted to say that at a recent communication committee that I attended, I'm not on that committee, but I attended a meeting a couple weeks ago. One of the things that was talked about was how to address some of these things. Like Renee is saying, like what's going on here and what's the narrative about the not approving the budget. Is it really about the number, or is it about the dissatisfaction with the past year? And that committee was bringing up ways to address some of that in the community, whether that's working with the different PTOs, having different virtual there was a budget presentation before the vote, but something else that might be a forum for people to voice their concerns or that kind of thing. So I do think this is a twofold approach. There's the issue of the actual budget, and then there's the issue of do people need to be heard, and do they have things they want to say about that, and do we need to provide opportunities for that?
Okay, thank you. Alice, your hand is still up. Do you have? Okay. Well, that was a lot. I'm not sure. Oh, we have another hand. Josh Howard.
Yes, I'd like to say that, I voted this budget down this year, not because of the increase, but because of the giant increase you guys had last year. And it's almost like saying enough is enough. Because what's it going to be next year? Like another 6% you're going to push for, and then 6% after that. Like I said, it's unsustainable, and I call it just fiscally irresponsible. It's just at some point, that's all we're going to end up paying in the state. We already pay high enough taxes, and this is one that just continuously goes up. And sometimes hard decisions have to be made. But like I said, even in administration, or you got to get creative sometimes and treat it like a business where you just can't just ask for more money all the time and it just magically appears.
Thank you, and I understand your concerns with the large increases each year. I'm not I'm not sure where we go from here. It doesn't sound like this is what we want to present to the board necessarily. We've heard that, you know, the cuts aren't enough. We've also heard, you know, the cuts are fine. It's not necessarily the money that's voted the budget down. So I'm not sure what guidance you guys are looking for as far as what to present on our board meeting next Thursday. But we may not be ready yet.
So Sarah, so I would ask a couple of things, or suggest that you might poll the committee to see if they're comfortable presenting the budget as outlined in this presentation, or if the finance committee would want to have an additional meeting to see a revision with guidance from the committee before it goes to the board. I think there's time to do that.
Sarah, can I add to that?
Sure.
There is a third way. I mean, it'd be nice to make this simple, say, just take it as it was presented tonight. But in a way, it took me 4.5 hours yesterday and a couple hours today to go through 97 pages plus to kind of get a handle on what this is. We're deciding an entire budget in less than 2 hours. I have not really heard much of an input from the school principals and administrators in that level in which these budgets very, very much affect. In the past, and this is in the past before we became the BUUSD, we used to have regular monthly finance meetings where the administrators would be able to weigh in on their own budgets, talking about how these things should and would work and what are the sacred cows. That process has not been fully met here tonight because of this voluminous amount of paper. The choice before you is whether or not you have another emergency finance meeting to continue this process and maybe hear more from people who can answer the dozens of questions. If anybody wants to read the full report, there are a lot of questions that you can go on for hours on. But you're trying to put something out that is going to be construed as being properly done. I have not heard what the Barry City Administration feels about some of the proposals that are in here. I'm told that the administration has all approved this, but I'd like to ask that administration, if the administration is the central office, that's one thing, but if it's everything combined with the leadership of the buildings, that's another thing. It'd be nice to know what are some of the issues that they're facing and what are the things that have to be kept in there, and what are the other things that they could possibly do without, and also where the central office could actually maybe reduce some things there too, so it seems like it's fair and balanced. The current chair of the board right now has said he wanted across the board. I'd like to see what across the board really looks like. I said I wasn't going to speak again, but I'm sorry, and thank you, Sonia.
Oh, Sarah, you're on mute.
Jeez. Sorry.
I know. It's common occurrence.
Thank you, Paul, and I understand what you're saying. I just want to confirm though, what you're looking for in the 90-page packet, that budget was the one that's draft 3. So that was originally put out, I think, in January. Is that right, Lisa? So that, what you were looking at there, that hasn't changed from before the vote.
I understand that, but we haven't had, as a finance committee, at least in my little world of being out there trying to sell this budget, I haven't had really an opportunity to ask some questions because we're making changes in draft 4. And we haven't really posited what those real major changes are between draft 3 and draft 4, other than that one single page out of thousands of lines of potential areas that could be either reduced or expanded or what have you. That's what I'm saying. It doesn't seem like a full process.
Okay. Sonia?
Thank you. I guess my question is do the committee members feel like the current draft with 3.8% increase overall increase is manageable. If they do not, if the current committee members don't, then what would they like to see as options? If they feel like the 3.8 is okay and they can live with the reductions as presented, that's fine. Would they like to see more? That's the question. And if you want to see more, then you can have another meeting to make a recommendation to the board, and you could ask Lisa, please bring us X, Y, and Z for possible reductions. Or you can decide. I mean, we've heard from community members, we've heard from some administrators, we've heard from, but these are just a few people. It's not all of the people who are going to vote on it. So this is obviously the challenge. Some people want it to be below 3%, and some people are saying it's probably okay at 3.8. So you guys have to decide how do you want to move forward? Is 3.8%, are you willing to, go out there and try to sell 3.8%? Are you willing to do the work that Chris was suggesting, which is maybe there's more to this than just the number, and it's we need to explain to the people why we asked so much last year and why we're asking for so much this year, because there is an explanation for that, and we obviously have not done a good job about explaining that. So how do we get that information out? And I'm glad Josh is here because he will be instrumental in helping us get that information out. So how do we do that so that everyone in the community understands why we are asking for this much and why we've cut a small amount and we're using some of our fund balance, and whatever you guys decide to do, but what are you comfortable recommending to the board? And I understand that there's these competing things, but you guys are the ones that are going to have to sell it and decide.
Thank you. On that note, I think you're right. Maybe we should just kind of take a quick poll. Renee, Chris, and Gina, are you comfortable presenting this to the board next week? Or do we want to consider further cuts?
I think Alice has her hand up.
No, it's just, for some reason it won't go down.
Okay.
I think that I'm personally comfortable with bringing the numbers to the board. But that being said, I would like to be able to also bring some other considerations, which is something that the principals might be able to gather before then, is, just a feel of what are the other things that people voted it down for, and are there ways that we can communicate out between now and the vote as to how we're going to address those other things.
Thank you. Gina?
I'm comfortable bringing this. I mean, I've said before, my goal isn't to starve the school, so I'm comfortable bringing this number to the board. I agree it'd be nice to have some things in our back pocket, and I also just want to note that it feels like the same questions are getting asked over and over again about expenses and costs, and where's the money coming from, where's the money going. And in my experience, when the same questions are getting asked over and over again, it's because they're just not being answered in a way that people are understanding, and that's certainly the case for me as well. So I just think it might be worth, I don't know, I'll maybe try to review the notes. It might be worth going over the notes and seeing where those things are and trying to really put together a comprehensive packet of information so that we can try to answer some of those questions moving forward. I feel like I've had this conversation so many times, and there's still things that if you ask me right now, I'd fumble over the answer.
Okay, I agree. I think that's a very good point. Chris, how are you feeling about presenting this to the board?
I'm feeling fine with it. I think that, the 3.8 is a reduction from what we voted on in the election. So I feel fine with that. But I do think you know, being a very newly elected board member and one step away from a community member with not a lot of budget knowledge myself, if I'm being honest, is a big learning curve. You know, for me, even to, and I work in a school and have a lot of knowledge about that stuff, but to get a packet that's almost 100 pages and try to make sense of that, I think a lot of this stuff is very overwhelming for the public to really understand, like, what are we actually talking about? So I'm wondering if the piece to help folks understand is to say, so we're putting forth this budget for the next vote in May. It's at 3.8%. If we were to go down to 2.9%, you know, a number that is 3% or makes people feel more comfortable, this is what it means for kids. This is how kids feel that reduction. This is exactly what we would lose. This is what your kids would not have access to. As a parent, that has a big impact on me when I say, like, so what does it mean if I vote yes on this? What does it mean for my children? And then maybe that helps me to have a different perspective. But that would be the piece that I think needs to come out about what does this budget mean and what does it look like for kids in the different schools at this level? What would it look like at the next level? And just some easy to understand information for folks, because I think there's a lot of these charts with all the numbers that are very overwhelming for the lay person to understand. So I would be comfortable taking this to the board as it is. Thank you.
Okay, good. Thank you. I am in agreement. I saw the draft 4 earlier today. I looked at it and I thought it was fantastic. You know, we're dropping from, I think it was what, almost 4.5% down to 3.8. That's a significant cut. We're using additional revenue from our fund, our tax stabilization fund. We're not completely cleaning that out. So I'm comfortable bringing this to the board next week, getting their input. I think Chris and Renee and Gina, everybody has a really good point. I think part of our communication to the community should be, you know, these are the parts of the budget that we really don't have a lot of control over. You know, not a lot of people understand the way that negotiations work or the health insurance for staff. And we really should point out the fact, you know, if this doesn't pass, this is what we're going to be looking at next, and this is how it affects your kids. But I think that those are things that we can take to the communications committee and to Josh, and maybe get some pamphlets, some you know, mass mailing, something out there to the public so that they know what we're looking at and they can understand it better, again, than a 100-page packet. Renee, did you? You're muted.
I just have one more thing to say, and I think I've heard this in a lot of districts, is that especially because of COVID, that it's not about the teachers, it's not about the teacher unions. It's, you know, it's everybody's worried about so many things, but that in the end, it's the choices that we're making are in the best interest of the students. And we're doing this because of the kids and not because of unions, not because of, you know, the community, whatever. We're presenting a budget that we believe is in the best interest of children. And I think that that's the main thing that we need to say over and over again is we're showing up for the kids. We're doing this for the kids, and we want to make sure that they're going to be all right and they're going to be successful. And all the other stuff is secondary.
Absolutely. Mr. Wells.
Yes, thanks. Yeah, I appreciate the committee's confidence in the work that the administration did and Lisa did. A couple of things. So I know Josh's head is swimming right now of all the ideas that he can do for budget promotion, because he's very skilled at that. Actually just came away from a conference about school communication. So I'm sure that will be well in hand, and he'll have some examples that he could share. The one word of caution I would say to the school board is, and being a resident of Montpelier, there is a line that you can cross in promoting your own budget. So, you know, you certainly can say we feel this is responsible and this gets your students what they need, and these are the programs that we feel that is important to fund. But there was one, and now it's probably 15 years ago, where Montpelier in their advertisements went a little bit too far. It was essentially saying like, please pass the budget or we'll have to deal with broken windows and the kids won't have appropriate bleachers. And they got sued and they had to revote and they had to pay the legal fees of the person who sued. So you do have to be careful that you don't cross that line.
Thank you. Understandable. You know, we don't want to threaten our voters. Okay. Do we need to vote on moving this to the board? No?
Well, you wouldn't vote. You would say you've already polled, so it's probably by consensus because the committee members have all agreed to it. So
Okay.
you would say you agreed by consensus to present draft 4 as presented tonight to the board, recommending that they approve it. And the one thing that's kind of outstanding to me is there was some discussion suggestion of when presenting this to the board to maybe have some other potential reductions at that meeting. And I don't know if that is a part of your agreed upon plan, or if you just want to stop at, this is what we're presenting to.
Renee?
I mean, I think that, you know, I might not like it or not, but I do think that Paul has a lot of really good points on this, in that regardless if we agree with where it's at or not, if we don't have some sort of plan to get it down, then we're stuck. And so, I mean, I think that it would be beneficial, even though I agree with what it is, and I think that we need to find out what the other factors are that are playing into it, that are making it so it didn't pass. I do think we need to have a backup plan of the just in case. If we get feedback from the community and it's like, it's this, then okay, we can address those things. But if it's simply because of budget, I think we need to have a backup plan of the just in case.
Okay. Paul?
Just a procedural thing. Is the committee for finance made up of the 4 board members? Are there any other individuals from the community that can be participant of this or not? I hadn't heard that tonight.
I'll chime in here, Paul. I think we had never formally agreed whether how to have new members come on, or community members come on to the board and be voting members. And I know that there are some outside community members on facilities and policy, but I don't know if they're voting members. I don't know, honestly. So I think you can participate as a committee member, but you don't have a vote to make a recommendation to the board. That's the way that I understand it.
I agree with you 100%. I'm just talking about how you get community. We're always talking about getting community involved with being involved with these committees. They're not voting members, but I think they do have a say.
Well, absolutely. But regardless of any of that, community members can show up to any committee meeting at any time, or every single committee meeting every single time, and participate, because it's a public meeting. So you don't have to be a member of the committee to be able to participate.
So if I can chime in for a second, going back to previous discussions on this matter, my recollection is that community members may be on committees, and that the committees make recommendations, don't actually hold votes, but that it was determined that if you're going to invite a community member to be on a committee, it's kind of a slap in the face if you say, but you can't, your input doesn't count. So it was deemed that if someone was officially part of the committee, not just participating as public input, that their input was counted. And if a committee could not come to a consensus on something, that's what would be presented to the board, was that, you know, so many of us wanted to go this avenue, the rest wanted to go that avenue, but that folks who are officially on a committee do have official say in what gets reported back to the board, if that makes sense. Because some committee members from the outside said, if you don't value my opinion and it doesn't happen, why do I want to be on your committee? So it was deemed that their input would be counted, but we're not holding any official votes. Does that make sense? You're muted, Sonia.
Yeah, it makes sense. And then at the same time, there are, you know, there's other board members here, and it's not really our place right now to have this conversation because we're not part of the committee about whether we think this is a good idea to recommend to the board, because then we would be discussing it as a full board, and or we have a quorum of the board here, so we can't do that. But I also would say with other community members participating, if we only had one community member here participating, and that community member was regularly showing up to board meetings as a community member, I would agree with you, Andrea. But this is our first meeting with a new board, so it's kind of hard to say where do we draw the line between Mr. Malone and Mr. Howard, because they both have expressed concern. And maybe that could just be reflected in the minutes that there were community members who expressed concern at not presenting the budget as presented.
Right. I mean, currently the committee is made up of the defined 4 people.
Right.
And it's only the 4 people who are defined on the committee. I'm just saying, when community members are officially added to a committee, which they are on some of our other committees, they are considered, even though we're not voting members.
Right.
So,
and I completely understand that. I think we're in a different space right here because it's the first, we haven't added any community members to this committee yet.
correct. This committee has 4 individuals.
Right.
Right. So I see the point, and so that it would be at the school board level where the school board could make a decision about a membership and size of committees.
Okay. So from what Renee said, and I think maybe Gina said earlier, do we want to, as a committee, recommend this proposed draft 4 to the board with the ask that Lisa and the administrators come up with a contingency plan in the event that the board does not like it?
So I'm fine with that. And I'm going to be a little bit pointy right now in that I've asked for a contingency plan twice and I've been turned down both times. So, and I do think it's a powerful message. I agree with Chris that telling people what they're going to lose means something. So I think that, you know, if we're going to do that, then we really need to see something. We really need to frankly put some teeth behind it, because I think I think it's important to bring home what the reality of a failed budget means for the students in the district.
And as well, I think that we also need to think about how contracts work and stuff. And so, you know, I don't know what this district does exact for timelines, but typically contracts go out around April 1st. And so if the contingency plan is to be cutting people, then they should be getting RIF notices instead of contracts. And so I think that that's something that, in thinking about the contingency plan, if those people, whoever they are, should be getting those instead, those are things that have to go out. I mean, like I said, I'm totally comfortable with presenting the current budget to the board, but we need to have a plan E, I think we're on, so that if it goes down in May, we still have some options.
Okay. Sonia?
So I just want to clarify, because Lisa put together a, if when the finance committee asked, you know, what happens if we you know, if you can get us below this number, what happens if we get to 2%? And there is a list of things that are on that. And I remember athletics being on it. Athletics was, you know, that was the one that stood out to me because we had a parent show up and say, why are you cutting athletics? And that was just on if the budget doesn't pass. And here we are, the budget hasn't passed and we're not discussing that list. So maybe we could bring that list back and the administrators could fine tune the list and actually tell us what, because they've already done the work. They've already identified some of those things that would be on the chopping block. And what does that actually mean? Like, okay, athletics, but what does that look like? Are you going to cut particular teams? Are you not going to do new uniforms? Like, what does that actually mean for students and for the community, as an example? I know you have it already because we talked about it.
Okay, thank you. Chris, your feelings on this? Same?
Yeah, I don't have a change in my position. I mean, I think it's I guess it sounds like we need to hear from the administrators about those items, and the question is, would we hear about that at the board meeting or at another finance committee meeting? Because it sounds like that's the decision to be made right in this moment, unless I'm incorrect.
So I think what we're saying is that this draft 4 is what we're going to bring to the board meeting on Thursday. In the event that the rest of the board is not comfortable with it, we want a list of what else we can cut, so that we have still something to bring to the board.
Honestly, I think I'd like to have that before we go to the board. I'd like to be able to present to them, this is what we believe, and that if they say no, we have a backup. Because like I said, I'm just thinking teacher contracts and teacher timelines, and if it's after April 1st, we're in trouble. I mean, my own personal belief is it looks good, but I'm thinking about the whole, and the whole is that if we don't have that backup plan, and I mean, we might already have it and we just need to review it. But just to make sure that we have a backup plan in case the board doesn't agree with it. Or if it goes and it gets voted down, that we've got something else and we're covered with the contracts.
Okay, so you're proposing we hold another meeting before next Thursday?
I'll let David talk and then I'll say.
Okay.
My concern about this, we certainly can, as an administration, look for other things to present to the board. But I want to be, for the benefit of students, be cautious about that. But also, this is something that we've talked about in communications as well, is the narrative that we're talking about. So here, this would be my concern. If we presented some options for the board, and it's discussed at the board meeting with the newspaper, taking notes and being ready for the next front page headline, and we suggest that, you know, we need a certain percentage. We could get to 2%, but that would mean that all JV sports would have to be dropped, or we would no longer have a hockey team or something like that. Things that we're not really willing to do. That will be part of our narrative. That the board is, I don't know, desperate times at the Barry School Board meeting. Sports were considered as cuts, and eliminating preschool or something like that, or things that. So the things that we present, I think, need to be things that we could live with, and that we could look our parents in the face when we talk about it, and that we'd be comfortable if it's in the Times Argus. And that's just, I think, part of our narrative that we have to think about when we talk about funding our school.
Okay, I'm hearing what you're saying. I definitely don't want you guys to bring us anything that you're not willing to have happen. That seems like a pointless exercise. So I'm sorry, I guess I didn't see this list that Sonia had spoken about before, but I think maybe that's what we're referring to is we want to see, honestly, I'm comfortable with draft 4. I'm very happy to bring that to the board, but I don't speak for the entire board. So I don't know if they're going to recommend that to the voters. In the event that they don't, what do we have that we can cut? And maybe that's going back to the principals in the schools and asking again. But and Renee, did you want to have a meeting before Thursday, or is that something you're comfortable with bringing there? And I understand your point about the Times Argus being there. In reality, the Times Argus could be in this meeting right now, listening to this as well. It's a public meeting, so whatever we say here, I'm comfortable saying at the other meeting. But I just need to know what the committee feels. Do we want to meet again before the full board?
I think that probably the responsible thing to do would be to try to meet again before the full board. As loath as I am to have another meeting, we all have a lot on our plates, but I think that there's been enough uncertainty in this conversation that, to David's point and to Lisa's point, we need to be a unified front. And I think the best thing that this committee could do, going back to the full board, is be on the same page. And I think, and I don't know that we are right now, and I think we'd all feel more comfortable if we knew what the next set of cuts look like. David, I hear you. I agree with Sarah. We should only talk about things that we're willing to do. I'm the one that keeps on saying athletics and getting quoted in the paper about it, so that's super fun. But I think it's powerful. I don't mean it. I don't. This is going to make it sound worse. I don't mean it as an empty threat to the community. I don't want to play hardball and say, well, if you don't do this, then we're going to cut this hockey team. But like, if we don't have enough money to pay for math, then we're going to cut the hockey team, because at the end of the day, all of the kids need math and only the hockey team needs the hockey team. And so I think that it's important for people to understand, especially, I'm fairly convinced that this was an emotional vote down, not a word. And it's really easy to do that from this abstract place where it doesn't mean, and the consequences aren't really clear. And we'll vote you. We're gonna make you go back and figure out another budget. Cool. Okay. So this is what that actually looks like. I think it's really important. I think that's why the budget passed last year, because we had a list of people who were going to get cut if it didn't. And that's a really powerful statement. Sorry, I tend to be long-winded. So I think that I don't know what the full committee schedule is like. I don't have a committee meeting in my calendar on Tuesday for next Tuesday. It's because my calendar might be incomplete, but if that's an open day, then I think that we should schedule a follow-up meeting if we can.
Curriculum's meeting on Tuesday.
Oh,
I think
sorry.
Monday's open next week. Next week, Monday.
Okay, if that's the way, I think you're probably right. It's probably prudent that we meet again and just take a look at, what the next steps would be. I'm comfortable with Monday. Do we need a certain timeline for warning of the meeting, or are we within our?
Yeah, we're within the timeline, so we could get something out, I believe, maybe tomorrow.
Okay. And I realize that we're not giving you a whole lot of time to go back to your list, so I appreciate putting the work. Appreciate you guys for putting in the work.
So we'll just keep in mind that what we've decided is that we're bringing the draft 4 as presented tonight. We'll also have a warning prepared because the board will need to approve the warning as well. And then on Monday night, we can discuss what the contingency draft 5 would be, and we would have a warning prepared for that as well.
That sounds good.
Okay.
Andrea, do you need a formal consensus of those plans?
No. If anyone really objects right now, raise your hand. If any of the 4 committee members objects, please raise your hand.
Okay. So that is the plan right now. We will plan on bringing draft 4 to the board. We will meet again on Monday, 5:30 to review what additional considerations will be. Moving on down our agenda to 6.2, report of, sorry?
I'm sorry. I have to step out.
Okay.
I've the limit here. Thank you guys.
All right. Thank you, Gina. 6.2, report of COVID-related expenses, funds, and grants. And forgive me, I don't know if I actually saw 6.2 in the packet. Lisa?
Yeah, so 6.2 is just a graph or chart showing the COVID grants that we've received thus far, what their allocation was, the award amount, the expenses to date, and then just a summary of what we've purchased, or in the case of ESSER 1, what we plan to use those funds for.
Okay, and this, sorry, I found it. For anybody following along, it's page 63 of the PDF.
And I promise I won't add all the detail next time.
The ESSER expenses to date and allocation, does this include what draft 4 was considering?
No.
Okay.
That would be ESSER 2 funding.
Okay.
And we've received the allocation, so we know what how much we're receiving, but there's more details to follow on that particular award.
Okay. Any questions or comments on the COVID-19 funding? Renee, your hand's still up. I don't know if it's from before. Okay. All right. In that case, moving on. We added 6.3, designate person and alternative person to sign the warrants. And I'll need some guidance on what I'm doing with that.
So we have a warrant signature procedure, and it's simply for our AP. So our AP staff accountant will have the warrant ready on Thursday afternoon. And so the committee would just designate a person who typically it's somebody who's available, because we really, we also need to coordinate with Carol Dawes, the treasurer. So if you're available on Thursday afternoon to stop by the office and review the warning, Michelle will also send the warning out in an email to everybody on Thursday afternoon, so you can review that. But if you want to come in and I can give you some guidance, Sarah, I know you've done that before, but it's just reviewing the warrant and then the attached invoices.
Okay, and that has to be one of our committee members?
Yes.
Okay. Gina's gone. Chris, Renee, I don't know how much flexibility you folks have in your schedules. I can do it, honestly. I work from home and I have to pick my kid up in the afternoons anyway, so I can always swing down to the central office if anybody has a problem with that.
I mean, I work in Williamstown and I live in Barry, but if it's easy, Sarah, you can go ahead and do it.
Okay.
Yeah, that would be fine with me. I mean, I work in Montpelier and am committed contractually until 3 every day. So.
Okay.
And on, in situations where somebody isn't available, the superintendent or business manager are also allowed to sign the warrant. So You know,
And just remind me, is that weekly, bi-weekly?
it is weekly,
Okay,
every Thursday afternoon.
okay.
Unless there's, you know, a break or a vacation or something, we may skip a week, but we'll always give you a heads up.
Okay. I mean, if nobody has a problem with it, I can volunteer to do that. Especially if I can get them ahead of time to review. It shouldn't be a problem for me to swing down. But it looks like we also need an alternative person.
So if you weren't available or you were on vacation.
I can be an alternate.
Okay.
Perfect.
All right. Andrea, do we need a thumbs up vote on that, or?
Well, technically, what we need to do is the committee can only make the recommendation. This does have to go to the board for approval. So I'll put that the committee is recommending that Sarah is the first designee and that the alternate is Renee. And then they'll have a motion at the board meeting and then it will be official.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Moving on to 7.1, it's FY21 year-end projections. We've kind of already touched on this. It looks like right now we have a projected surplus of about 650,000. Lisa, can you tell, what's this, it says less 450, what is that?
So with the CRF funds, the Corona Relief Funds, there was two different expenditures. There was one that was non-budgeted expenditures like PPE and, you know, things that we didn't anticipate and were not budgeted for. The other types of expenditures were repurposed, and those were where we might have had transportation in our budget, but we used some of our bus time or busing routes to deliver meals. So it's a little bit confusing, but because there was such a deficit in the overall state education fund, the agency said that if we could sort of supplant some of this money into and take those expenditures, charge them to COVID funding, and then offset our education spending. So they'll hold back some of our education spending.
Okay, thank you.
A little confusing, but so instead of getting all of the revenue from the state that we budgeted for,
they're hanging on to
grant funding instead.
Okay. Any questions or comments for Lisa on the projections? No. Okay. Agenda item number 8, other business. Any comments or questions there? I don't have anything. No. Okay. Number 9, items for future agenda. And this obviously will not be for our meeting on Monday, but coordinated supply purchases and procedures, non-custodial follow-up.
I would recommend until we have a budget that we, you know, delay some of those other topics.
Okay. And also staff appreciation under efficiency studies. Okay. So we'll keep those on our radar, not necessarily for the next meeting or the following one, because we do need to get a budget passed. Number 10, we're going to move that up because it does say next meeting date is April 6th. Right now, we're planning on meeting next Monday, which would be the 22nd at 5:30. So we'll get a warning out with the agenda item, again, just being FY22 budget. And I think unless anybody has anything else they want to comment or add? Not seeing anything. I just want to thank the administrators and Lisa for all the work that you've done. I know we're kind of putting some pretty tight deadlines on you guys, and I know it's a lot of work. And my committee members, thanks for being patient with me today. But
You did great.
Great. Thank you. All things considered, I think that we can adjourn, only half an hour late. Oh, sorry, Alice?
I'm just saying
Thank
good
you,
night.
everyone.
Okay.
Lisa, can I send you a link to a Google Meet just to chat for a moment? Okay, thank you.
All right, have a good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone.